Have you ever left a conversation with a Gen Z colleague feeling like you were both speaking two different languages? You're not alone. Recent surveys show that 36% of managers say they struggle to communicate effectively with Gen Z, and a staggering 75% admit they don't fully understand what Gen Zs even expect at work. So here's the real question. Are we failing to connect or just not speaking the same conversational dialect? Hi, my name is Goldie, your host for episode 46 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast.
And I'm Lakshan, your co host for this episode. Goldie and I are both ICF credentialed coaches with a shared passion for understanding generational dynamics, not just in theory, but in real people's lives.
Today's episode will be covered in two parts. What makes Gen Z's communication style different, and strategies for those hard conversations with Gen Z. Now, Gen Z is a cohort that both Lakshan and I have been working with and are familiar, obviously, both on a professional and personal level. So it's no secret that this generation, just a reminder, born between 97 and 2012, are the first true digital native generation who are now entering the workforce in full force. Many older Gen Z is actually already working side by side with more experienced professionals, so knowing how to meet them on the same page in conversations is actually crucial. But navigating tough conversations with them has turned out to be trickier than expected. Lakshan, before we go deeper into part one, I do want to ask your thoughts on this topic, and also because you were the one who suggested me we should speak about this theme today.
Yeah, so the reason that I brought this topic up, I had kept it and saved it for a rainy day, as they say. But while I was doing some research on certain topics we can talk about, I stumbled upon I think a YouTube video titled something along the lines of Gen Z don't know how to break up or something like that. And then that went into uh, me hearing about conversations from managers on how it's not easy to have tough conversations with Gen Z to really get them to pick up their slack, so to say. And I also had another conversation with my brother a few weeks back, talking about what his experience is like working in his organization. How his team is perfectly fine; he has no issues at all. But there are other teams where he feels like the culture is very toxic, and a lot of it is because no one seems to be listening to each other. And this is, of course, something he's hearing from his friends who happen to be Gen Z as well. So all of these things kind of put together is what prompted me to want to explore this topic. But the primary thing is about how Gen Z aren't breaking up from the relationships; they're just like ghosting each other. That's the
Yeah.
primary trigger.
Gosh, sounds like there's something to address here clearly. And, as we are coaches, we don't just go directly to assuming things. So I think it's really important. And that neatly brings us into part one, which is, what are the nuances that actually make Gen Z's communication style so distinct? Perhaps that's the starting point. Yeah. So in principle, we all consider communication to be this idea where one tries to get across, their message for the other party to understand them. In theory, this seems simple enough, but with Gen Z, although they too want to be understood and convey a message, it almost feels like this message gets blocked in a bottle. And we need to decipher this, and that's where it all begins. And we have to realize, how are they choosing to communicate? So they favor instant messaging, emojis, shorter sentences, and often their communication is fragmented, has a very casual tone, even at work. This is important to note. On the contrary, face-to-face small talk is actually declining for them. 40% prefer digital messages even when the person is nearby. And 74% struggle with light in-person conversation. So what I'm picking up already here is text over tone, which can be quite trivial if you are interpreting something just in written format rather than spoken. Okay. They also value direct, concise, and transparent feedback. Anything overly formal or delayed can actually feel tone deaf for them. And maybe this is why they're not listening. So, from the outset, it's clear that informal direct communication has become a default for Gen Z, often clashing in this case with the traditional long form style that's favored by the older generations, especially in managerial roles. Yeah. So, why has this shift even taken place? I wonder. I think we all must be wondering this. Well, the thing is, Gen Z came of age in post COVID, digitally driven, social media centric world. Okay. So, unlike previous generations, they didn't develop the same reliance on small talk or subtle social cues. Instead, they communicate directly with clarity and often very briefly, sometimes to the point that could be seen as bluntness. So, to the older cohorts, this can actually feel disrespectful, abrupt, and it reinforces the stereotype that Gen Z lack social skills or struggle in interviews. We've read those articles, haven't we, where they've been slammed down in interviews. Okay, so we're getting a picture here. But I feel that rather than judging the style, we need to understand the intent behind it: efficiency, transparency, and authenticity. These words suddenly change the frame of the conversation, don't they? Gen Z sees directness not as bluntness, but as respect for someone's time. So they keep it short. However, older generations might favor the soft entry, into feedback, long-winded meetings. Gen Z tends to prefer immediacy, clarity, and purpose with their interactions. Already we're seeing two different styles that seem to be knocking horns, don't we? So it's not that they lack patience. They just grew up in a world where what values for them is instant feedback loops. So just think: typing indicators, read receipts, likes, DMs, and of course, Reddit threads. These are all about speed and honesty. You read any Reddit thread, and the first thing that you're going to pick out is, whoa, that's really in your face, right? So, what they've done is they've built like an emotional fluency, not through tone of voice, but through digital signals, which can be used with GIFs, emojis, screenshots, and of course, the famous memes. Yeah. Hence the I may have come out of a conversation feeling like I'm speaking a different language to the person in front of me, right? So, what happens is this has led to a conversational tone that might seem casual, impersonal to older generations, but it's actually intended to be low friction, inclusive, and efficient. So, in essence, Gen Z's communication style is the product of high speed digital connection, deep social awareness, and a no fluff approach to dialogue. And who's the other type? We all know who they are. So they don't want performative small talk, they want meaning. Okay. They don't like long meetings, they want alignment. Above all, what they want is to feel equal participants in all conversations and not just the recipients of it. Okay. I think unpacking their motivations does help a little bit to decode, as I call it, the glitch. Lakshan, I've said a lot in part one, and obviously I have my own reflections, but I'm keen to know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think those three attributes that you mentioned, no, in terms of what they prefer: immediacy, clarity, and purpose
Yeah.
in their interactions, right? And
Mm.
how they want things to be low friction and inclusive, efficient, and all of these things. I think that's also one of the reasons why they feel like avoiding these tougher conversations is easier for them, because it's efficient for them
Yeah.
to just not have this at all, because it's they know it's going to be, as you mentioned, right, long-winded conversations, typically older generations. But of course, when it's difficult conversations that you have to have, even people from the same generation as them who kind of want to have this thing, but they kind of walk away from it. And I don't think they're also, while they appreciate low friction to the point messages that don't waste time, I don't necessarily think they're always receptive to that um, approach, which is a interesting thing I noticed, because it's like they want this, but are they ready to take anything that they don't like to hear? Is another thing altogether. So the things that we appreciate about them are really, really commendable. But the things that they really need to work on in order for this thing to be an example for everybody else to follow, I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, because otherwise you will not see ghosting being a thing that
Yeah.
happens. That ability to close the loop, whether it's positive,
Mm.
negative, whatever it may be. This thing about situationships, like no clarity
Yeah.
on who we are, what we are, that being another thing. In terms of, there's this other video I came across many years back, maybe you've seen it as well, Goldie, about Simon Sinek talking about Gen Z in the workplace, where the ability to kind of set expectations explicitly, like verbally, really make it out, put it out there, is something that they're still developing, because oftentimes they do some work and they expect a raise, and when they're not giving a raise in, say, 6 months, 12 months, whatever, they just put a email out of the blue, it may seem, for the manager or for the organization, saying, hey, I'm going to leave, you guys aren't valuing me enough, you're only paying me this much, I've been doing this much work, da, 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 da. And the point that Simon made is that, hey, if you just let us know this, we would have done something about this, because we really do value you. So these
Absolutely.
kind of conversations are not, I think, they don't come naturally to them in terms of thinking about it, because I feel like this efficiency, low friction element is so strong, that while they're very good at being transparent in their communication, I don't know if they're in their delivery. I mean, I don't know if they're ready to take the transparency um, in terms of hearing it from the other party. So it's like, how do you get it to be a two-way street? I
You
think that's
know,
what's coming up for me.
yeah, no, and it's interesting you say that, because let's not forget that when they're so accustomed to speaking through a digital platform, there is no expectation in return. So if they're having, even if it is a conflictive or difficult conversation with a peer, with a friend, through their DMs, if things go if things go south, they just walk out. No one's there to take ownership, if that makes any sense. And I think this is being applied in real life, or rather subconsciously they're applying it because they just don't know. They're not able to confront conflict. And so what I find a lot, and I'm making observations now in people that I work with, or even Gen Zers that I know on a personal level, there's a lot of decision fatigue occurring in their lives. They want to get things done, but that requires having that conversation, and they just put it on pause until the decision is in fatigue, as we say. And I think that creates more anxiety for them than just maybe picking up the phone and saying, I choose either to do this or not to do this. At least you've made a decision. But because those conversations require an emotional level of burden, that I think is the nail they don't want to pick on. It's happening not just in the workplace, but even with individuals having rapport with each other. And it's almost like inclusivity for them also means anything goes. So if I ghost you, that's acceptable. I mean, where else did situationship come from? It came from this idea of having something casual with no ownership.
Yeah.
And
it's no, please go on. Please go on.
no, I think you may just want to finish the sentence almost. Yeah.
Yes, it's as you're sharing this. What came up for me is that the intent of being authentic is there, but the intent of being vulnerable and being able to hold another person's vulnerability is not really there. And what came up for me as you were sharing this thing about this them feeling anxious. There was this
Yeah.
client I have still technically, and this person was talking about how there's this girl that he didn't really like, doesn't really like, but he doesn't know how to say no, or that he's not interested or whatever. And this girl happened to invite him for to attend a wedding with her, and he was very clear with me saying, "Hey, I don't want to go for this. I really don't want to go for this. But I hate conflicts. I hate conflict. I hate confrontation. Uh, for me, it's just like I just wait for it to blow over and be get over with. Right? I don't want to do anything about it. And even though he really wanted to not go ahead and go for that wedding, he kind of somehow convinced himself that no, it's okay. I'll put up with this and da, da, da. Eventually, he ended up not going, not because he took a stand, but because something else had happened. And that was a pattern that was showing up in other areas of his life as well. That not being able to have those hard conversations, it's really showing up in other areas of life. And
Yeah.
as coaches, we speak about how all of these things are systemic, even just in their own personal, uh, like say, like circle of impact and influence, right? Not just even beyond that, but just even in their own circle of influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've really summarized that so well there with the fact that it shows up in other areas of your life. So a conversation can be so banal, but if it's not had, can have a compounding effect. As you said. So obviously, we've nitpicked on how this form of communication is A, helping them, B, not helping them. But the idea today is obviously to unpack some strategies, right, on what can they do or what can we do as non-Gen Zers to facilitate those hard conversations. I think everyone needs to take some amount of ownership here. So I think, the awareness that we have that they still struggle, with connection because they call it a hard conversation. It varies across generations. It's not just them, is it? So for older millennials and Gen X, hard can often mean lengthy and detailed. For boomers, it probably means formal and respectful. And that's why for them, respect is defined as courtesy plus deference to experience. However, Gen Z flips that equation completely. And for them, respect equals efficiency and clarity. So they value direct, honest dialogue and get to the point without, this unnecessary build up or hierarchy. We have discussed, obviously, the fact that they are evading some emotional impact there as well. So I want to just give like an example of how this misfire can actually occur in conversations. I want to use this episode today for our listeners to almost picture having a real conversation with a Gen Zer and what sort of mindset and then tips or strategies they can apply in that conversation. So I'm making it a little bit more applicable today, our episode. So, for instance, when a Gen Z employee sends a short, to the point message without greeting or signing off, they may see this as respectful of your time. Yeah. But a boomer will see this as abrupt or even dismissive. Yeah, we've seen those. That's an example, okay, of one versus the other. Now, building on this fundamental lost in translation gap, we can now explore strategies that, make it easier and have meaningful and effective hard conversations with a Gen Z. So first, I want to focus, as I said, on the mindset that one can adopt when walking into a conversation with Gen Z. And this is actually helpful in any context, not just professional. So Then after that, I will offer specific constructive pointers that can be used as framing their conversation. Okay, so the first thing in mindset is start with empathy, not answers. We all know how connected they are with themselves. One thing is to be connected with yourself, but it's a whole other ballgame to show up and be that empathetic person with the other. But since we have the leverage on that, let's use our empathy. Okay. So you can open by asking questions and actually listening. So you're validating their feelings rather than jumping in with solutions. Why does this work? Well, it shows that you're invested in understanding and not lecturing. See, understanding versus lecturing. The second one is actually really hard, but I think we all need to understand as older cohorts, we need to get comfortable with discomfort because Gen Z does respect honesty, even when it's awkward. Let's not forget that they're already walking in feeling fairly uncomfortable. So, be prepared to explore complex or sensitive topics openly. Why does this work? Well, authenticity builds trust. And that's when the conversation becomes real. We already know that they want to be authentic, but we have to gain their trust. So we have to keep the conversation as real, even if that requires us to get a little bit uncomfortable in the situation. The third thing would be to make this a conversation and not a lecture. So avoid a monologue. Okay, that they hate that, right? We've read about this, we've understood it in part one. They don't like to have long meetings. So if you don't want to have a long meeting, encourage that meeting to be a dialogue, back and forth, back and forth. I personally apply this a lot when I do my workshops with Gen Zers in schools. I never make it a lecture. I do it an interactive experience, and I've had positive responses from that form of interaction. The reason that works is because they value the space where they can speak their truth and not just be listening passively. Their attention spans are already fairly low. We know this because of the digital overdose that they have. So if you're on top of that, going to give them a lecture or a monologue, you've lost them after 5 minutes of speaking. Yeah. This next one is applicable, I guess, for everyone generally. Show genuine cultural awareness. They are obviously living an experience in their lives which we don't have any idea about because we come from a different time. So they focus on inclusivity, identity, mental health. And if you can also be aware of how they are feeling, this would help because you're seeing how their values are reflecting on the world that they see daily. So it's a bit like wearing their glasses and seeing the world through their lens. A way to help yourself with that would be to become familiar with like the social media content that they're absorbing and drawing inspiration from, some YouTubers that they follow or TikTokers that they enjoy listening to. That's something maybe even for parents, right? Because we'd like to include everyone in this episode, whoever is struggling with those hard conversations with any Gen Z. Try to be a storyteller. This is the fifth point, and not lead with statements. So a good story is always a winning element. We know this even as coaches, where every client comes with a story, which is then unpacked, right? It fosters connection, relatability, and of course, emotional engagement, which is what we're trying to focus on here, getting their emotions to surface. So if you start with a story from your end, that's going to definitely encourage them to open up a little more as well. Yeah. And when you're talking about solutions, try to make them shared ones. It's very easy to say, do this, do that, because it's going to work. It's tried and tested. I'm sure it is. But for Gen Z, they thrive on collaboration. That's one of their biggest values. So, work together in identifying the path forward. This is particularly relevant in workplaces. Emphasize that growth comes from mutual responsibility and not just top down. Yeah, in terms of the hierarchical process. What happens here is that problems are then seen as opportunities for collaboration and development, and not a crisis that just needs to be solved. Yeah. Okay. Obviously, they do prefer direct language. Don't forget the respectful language, of course. And then, avoid ambiguity, because we have to also remember one very important scientific thing here is their brains are still not fully developed for decision making. So if you're going to give them an ambiguous playground to work with, this is going to be that much more challenging for them to clarify in their minds, where do I go from here? So setting expectations is also a really valid point here from the side of the manager, or even a parent, or someone who's sort of having that conversation with them. It sounds obviously like it's all the things that they don't know how to do, as you must have observed, but that's precisely what we're there for, to mentor them in a gentle way, but also make them feel like they're capable, and they will reach to that point of being able to be a contributor, a positive contributor in these hard conversations. And of course, keeping it brief and structured, they thrive on concise, clear communications and agendas. Okay. In terms of pointers, when you're framing the conversation, this is the second part. It's important to focus on values and purpose. As we've said, they want to know why something matters, not just what to do. So the why over the what. Yeah. Invite their input. Have that objective in mind in the conversation. What am I expecting them to share with me? Something I don't know. Go with the I don't know theory. Ask for feedback. Listen openly, and on their perspective, include them in decision making, even if it's a small one. So these are things that can, really just construct the framework of a good conversation that they otherwise may not know how to have. Yeah. And of course, the obvious one, try to mix it up and make it part digital, part in person. There's nothing wrong with sending a few messages and then follow it up with a face to face, summary, just to kind of bridge styles. I think that's harder for the boomers, obviously, but we have to also recognize that being digital does have its perks and values, and leverages a lot on saving time in many, many ways. Yeah. I think just to sort of sum up the whole thing, we have to adapt our tone to theirs in asking questions that are clear. Avoid assuming things, because Gen Z is very sloppy in not understanding what clarity means. And so this would be a great moment to be super crystal clear on what, our expectations are. And it's not like meeting halfway. It's actually meeting with empathy and curiosity. So that famous line, meet me halfway. No, meet me with empathy and curiosity. I think we need to just sort of code our own way of conversing if we want, Gen Z to feel heard and understood. I've said a lot again. Lakshan, I know that you've been attentively listening, and I hope that does make it easier for our listeners as well. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I completely agree with the points that you brought out, Goldie. Especially, when you spoke about focusing on shared solutions. It's like collaborate on the entire experience, right? It's like a monologue, when it's like a one way thing. Not just Gen Z, nobody's going to want to pay attention. Now, the difference, of course, is it's the difference between being able to pay attention and not being able to pay attention. That is, I think, a generational thing. But what is common across generations is not having to want to pay attention to all these things, right? So, if you just go monologue, then no one's going to listen in this,
Yeah.
independent of generations. But if you put things out there and say, hey, there are certain facts, these are certain observations that I have, um, bring up the values and purpose angle, saying, hey, this is why it's important for us to address this,
Yeah.
and this is what will happen if you don't address this. Uh, I don't know how to address it. One thing that you mentioned, which is I don't know factor, and ask, hey, how can we address this thing together and make this go away? It's not comfortable for you or for me, and own that and say, hey, this is not going to be a comfortable conversation to have, but because of this value set and purpose, we have to have this, and this is the approach that will really, really work, because when it's a collaborative environment and people feel like they don't have to keep their guard up, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier for them to just say things as they come, and conversations. It takes a while to kind of break the ice, so to say, but then when it settles, it really does settle. And the like the quote that came up for me immediately as you were sharing this thing was, I think it was Mahatma Gandhi's quote of "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yeah.
So set the example of how you want a person to receive what you're saying, and kind of play it back as well. So that's something that's coming up for me.
Absolutely. Um, if I may, share a personal example lived with a Gen Z. Um, I've been working with somebody in the recent months on a professional level where, incidentally, I'm the client, and they're providing me a service. And this person I'm working with is a Gen Z, and there has been a couple of occasions when some direct feedback has been necessary from my end to this person. And if I'm honest, the first time it happened, I felt almost a little taken aback that I was needing to give this feedback, because I automatically put myself in the person's shoes and thought, oh, but I would never have done that. This would never happen if I was on the receiving end. But I caught myself and I realized that I'm not them and they are definitely not me, and what really helped was actually applying a lot of these principles. And it was very beneficial for two things to really go right, which was the time of the feedback. So if the error or the mistake occurs and you pick up on it immediately, you cannot give them the feedback at that moment, because that hard conversation will A, not be receptive, and B, as we've observed, their emotional literacy is far less evolved than ours may be. Or even if they are emotionally involved, as you said, they tend to shove it under the carpet or dust it and ignore it. However, if you wait for the right moment, you're able to notice that they actually listen. And again, keeping it clear to the point helped a lot. And all I needed to observe was what they had said and relay those words back to them. The same words. So it wasn't even like giving feedback which was based on my opinions. It was actually just picking up their words and saying, look, you said this. How does that sound to you? Would you say that again to me? Remember, I'm your client. And this person recognized within instance, oh, that's so not professional. Those were the words. And I'm really sorry, Goldie. So, I think we underestimate them, and we shouldn't. They really do have so much potential to pick up these feedbacks that we want to give them. It's just that they're not fully ready in the world because they come from a place which didn't give them that exposure. And I think that brings us into conclusions. So Gen Z obviously may feel disengaged at times. Only 31% actually say they're engaged in the workplace, whilst 54% are not, and 15% say they're actively disengaged. So, but that doesn't reflect their capacity, as I said, for meaningful dialogue. It reflects the mismatch in how the conversation is structured or not. So here's the encouraging part. When given clarity, feedback loops, and shared purpose, Gen Z can actually sustain deep, productive conversations. 72.4% of managers actually say that regular feedback motivates them. That's a really high number. And 45% found that mentorship was effective. So this clearly shows that they can be guided into the conversation and not shut out by it. So yes, having hard conversations with Gen Z can be tricky, but it's not impossible. With clear, respectful, and empathetic approaches, paired with the structural support from other generations, they're very capable actually of sustaining solid and almost meaningful dialogue. So we've covered a lot of things today in this episode, and I'm very cognizant of this. And we always have more to offer you. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, hop over to watch episode 10 next, because this is where we addressed the intricacies of communication, not just for Gen Z, but across different generations. And if you're listening on Spotify, do check out episode 10 there. With that, we've come to the end of episode 46 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Goldie.
And I've been your co host, Lakshan. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and tuning in all the way to the very end.
Muchas gracias.
See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.